good evening, everyone. And as David said, tonight we're going to look at the Battle of Mont St Quentin in 1918. Hopefully, you've all found yourself at the right place and you're not being ambushed with a subject that you didn't know was coming in your direction. So, Mont St Quentin may be known to some of you. It's not part of the Western Front that everybody goes to. It's a bit further down south, pretty much on the edge of the Somme region, near the town of Peronne. Tonight we've only got the hour, the usual hour, so we can't really talk too much about the whole battlefield of Peronne and the associated areas around Mont St Quentin. We're going to stick with the battle on the Mont itself, and without further ado, let's get cracking into it. And there's a view of the Mont, just setting the scene there. And I'll begin by, as the grey dawn began, thinning to light, restless men of the 5th Australian Infantry Brigade lay motionless in the damp green and yellow grass and the slimy, chalky shell holes. The ethereal outline of the Mont began to be revealed, rising above them with its shattered trees and broken buildings. Akin to a vast amphitheatre, a ruined landscape, and so much barbed wire, it had rolled up into huge balls resembling alien spiders, whose webs were sure to catch the men of the 5th. The whisper, 5 minutes to go, was passed along the line. Anxious men, deep in their own thoughts, watched the final minutes tick away. And at 5 a.m. the barrage began, and 1,250 men of the brigade rose up as one, stood straight, and began jogging slowly forward, cheering, yelling and shouting. It was August the 31st, 1918, and the Battle of Mont St Quentin was underway. So what about this battle at Mont St Quentin then? Let's just zoom out, as they say, to look at where we're talking about, having now set the scene for what those men were about to do. This is the area of the battlefield. You'll probably be familiar with that Roman road of Albert Bapaume on the Somme there, and Peronne on the River Somme itself, and all the way out to the west is Amiens. So before this battle takes place at Mont St Quentin, of course, we had the Battle of 8th of August 1918 and the start of what became known later as the last 100 days, when we hammered a series of blows against the German forces on our front, and that involved down here the British, Australian, Canadian forces, which pushed out from just east of Villers-Bretonneux, along that Roman road that you can see there, the D1029 as it is today, past La Motte-le-Fossé, Arbonnières, places that you'll be familiar with if you've walked those battlefields of Amiens and Villers-Bretonneux. So that was the position in around the middle of August 1918. This was on that return push. Don't forget, of course, we've had the Somme battles in 1916. Then we've taken over this section of the line. We've had the German withdrawal to the Hindenburg line in early 17. And then, of course, we'd lost all that space, excuse me, in early 1918, March and April in the German offensives. And this was now August of 1918 and the push back. And this is the progress that we've charted so far. British now attacking north of the River Somme, Australians and Canadians further south. And the area that we're going to look at a little bit more detail now is Peronne. That allows us to look at the Battle of Mont St Quentin. And if you look at that cross small square there, this is Mont St Quentin, just here north of Peronne. So let's move a little bit closer. Let's look at this ground. The key feature here of the Mont is obviously the high ground. But the key feature that was going to channel the troops and be very much a thorn in the side of the planning for this series of battles is the Somme River. We have a note on the Somme river there, which gives a good description of it. And I can read that to you now. The steep banks have disappeared now, and for a mile or so on either bank, the ground slopes gently toward the riverbed. The river itself is around 500 yards wide, in fact, being a broad marsh studded with islets, overgrown with rushes, with channels threaded between them. Marshes are no more than waist deep, but the flowing channels are deeper and fast flowing, so too deep to be waded. So as you can see there, sometimes 500 yards wide, in fact, in other places over 700 yards wide. It's a sort of confusing part of the battlefield around Peronne and down on the Somme itself, because in some places it appears to be much smaller than this and just a straight stretch of water. But here near Peronne, the Somme River goes from an east-west to a north-south after a series of bends. And then, as I say, it flattens out, and this marshy, small islet area with little tributaries became quite difficult. And actually, many, many years before the Great War, they'd canalised it in this section. And so the Somme River became a series of obstacles for the army to deal with, including a canal, the river and the marshes, and then in due course further north was the beginning of the Canal du Nord, which at this point, of course, was not wet, as they say. But this is at Foyers, just west of Peronne, this picture, and is one of the crossing points that's used in the battle. And this little location, lovely little spot if you want to head down there. It's got fishing, there's picnic areas, there's a bend in the river called Omicourt. Again, you can see how in places it's crossed by not so much traditional bridges today, but by these raised embankment causeways with the river running underneath. Another example here, this is actually at Peronne. Right round the edge of Peronne was the Vauban style ramparts, rather like at Ypres, and this is a stretch with part of the Somme River going underneath it, and you can see the damage here on these walls caused by the Great War. I mean, Peronne is one of those towns that's been attacked and plundered numerous times. I think it was in Norman times it was attacked. In the Spanish wars, it was attacked again. In the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, it was attacked, and then, of course, in the First World War and in the Second World War, it was attacked. So it's had a fair beating as Peronne. But more about the city on another talk. Let's get back to our part of the battlefield. So this map just kind of shows you Google Earth view and some of the key features that we're talking about. Let's start way out to the left on the Foyers. Ignore the very obvious motorway. That's a much more modern location. This is the location we mentioned a minute ago, Foyers, where one of the crossings are. The little village of Clery-sur-Somme on the north bank. And this is obviously where it runs from an east-west point. At Omicourt, it turns south, and this is where Peronne has grown up over those years. It's the Vauban defences are just this section here, but it was chosen because it sat on high ground, just over the river. So the river provided a defensive feature, and the Vauban built defences provided cover and what have you for defences many years after. This line here shows the line of the Canal du Nord, which is obviously running today, but in 1918 wasn't completed. In fact, some places it hadn't even been begun at all. It was just marked out. Certainly in this part of the battlefield, a lot of it had been begun, as I say, was not flooded. Small village of Hal here, Mont St Quentin and Hill 115, the main part of our talk today are shown thus. This is all new, this part of Peronne here, so you can disregard all of this area. In 1918, battlefield of Peronne, the city of Peronne, really was just this section here and a little bit north of the river and south at Flamicourt. And again, all of this round here is new, and the village of Biache shown on there as well. But you can get a depth of this back part of the battlefield by this aerial photography here, and how it is, 800 meters across in places, very marshy where it isn't running freely. And this shows the line of the Somme Canal, this section here crosses, and you end up with this peninsula at Omicourt. So we'll talk about that more on the next slide. So here's crossing points marked for you there. That was intact at Fourrières. The Australians had captured a crossing across the canal, Somme here, the Somme Canal here. But the crossing at Omicourt was blown by the Germans, as was the one at the village further south at Biache, and the crossing into Peronne itself. There was two river crossings here, a road and a railway bridge, both lattice girder works. It was hoped that they would be captured, obviously allowing a much freer movement of forces, but they were blown pretty much in sight of this approaching Australian forces by German sappers. This then leads to where the Australian positions were prior to the battle on the 31st of August. 3rd Australian Division held the line just north of the Somme River. This is important because obviously north of the Somme River was held by British and Australian troops, allowing movement from an east to west direction. 2nd Australians moved into the line. They'd just had a whole 6 days rest, having been fighting earlier on, but relatively rested at that point from 6 days away. And then the 5th Australian Division are also in line on the right flank. As you look at a map, it would obviously make sense for the 2nd and the 5th to come across in an easterly direction, but they found their way barred by the river, and so it leads us to hearing how this chap, Sir John Monash, is going to take control and come up with a new plan, which was rather daring. What about those Germans at this time? And this is actually what Monash has said about those Germans in front of him that he came to see at Peronne. And he says, the retreat was unlike that of 1917. Now we had a corps flushed with success and eager to advance, while he, the enemy, was suffering heavy losses and a lowering of morale. He had an impassable river behind him and only passable at 3 places, Brie, Peronne and Etapigny. And lastly, this time, it was battle forcing him back, as time was against him. Further, Monash says, he was compelled to fight all the time and withdrew in disorder. He was forced to abandon guns and ammunition on a huge scale, hundreds of thousands of rounds in large dumps, depots, as well as tons of empty cases, brass of which was priceless to the enemy. Monash goes on to say that the most formidable part of the German army to deal with at this point was the machine gun corps of the Germans. The manner in which their machine gunners stood their ground, serving the guns to the last and defying even the juggernaut menace of our tanks, won the admiration of our men. Using his guns to great advantage, they constituted the only obstacle to our rapid advance. And of course, Ludendorff had great manpower problems by this time. Blow after blow since August the 3rd had meant mixed regiments, amalgamated divisions, with guys that didn't know each other were being thrown in. Pioneer and Minenwerfer companies were being pulled into the front line as infantry. Labour battalions, a bit like our Labour Corps, were being brought forward. And this time they were being put into ad hoc units, and reserve divisions were were coming forwards, meaning there was no reserves behind. So as Monash's troops are moving forward, the German troops are having to very much fight on the back foot. And as he said in his quote there, this was not an advance. This was not a retreat by the Germans to the Hindenburg line, which was all nice and planned and at their own pace. This was very much being an advance by the Allies at a tempo dictated by the Allies and not really by the Germans. And although they do say that the advance of the Allies was very much dictated by the state of the road system rather than by the enemy. And that was an indication of how poor the roads had become through years of war, but also how effective the Germans were at what I think we call nowadays a scorched earth policy. And they would block the roads, blow the bridges, blow up culverts constantly. And so every time we needed to advance, endless amounts of men and machinery, we'd come across problems. There's a comment on this. There was a never-ending stream of Allied traffic, labouring slowly eastwards from Amiens with extreme congestion. Ammunition, lorries, horse transport, dispatch riders, marching infantry, mule trains, traction engines towing howitzers, convoys of motor buses, tanks, mess carts, signal cars, staff cars and gangs of labourers, all surging steadily forward in an amazing jumble, but with never a moment's pause. This is the spectacle for Monash. So, having seen the advance, he urges his men forward, and it's worthy of note that by now, divisional commanders and indeed the brigade commanders under Monash were very much pushing for a pause. And men were very, very footsore, really short on men. The manpower levels were extremely low. If you remember that opening paragraph I gave of the description of the chaps getting up as one and charging up the Mont, it described a brigade of 1,200 men, whereas normally that would be one battalion. And at this stage, there should be 4 battalions still in a brigade in the Australian brigades. So they're massively under strength. And so, Rosie here from Sir Charles Rosenthal and the other divisional commanders and some of the brigades commanders were asking Monash continually for time to slow down, to allow the tanks to catch up and be replenished, to allow time for reinforcements to arrive and generally allow the men to recuperate. But Monash was pushing his men forward, and this chap here, Rosenthal, is chosen for the next push. He's got the centre of the battlefield. As you know, the 3rd Division were just on the north side of the river, the 5th Division on the south. Monash has got an opportunity to push forward, and he uses Rosenthal's 2nd Division to do so. Rosenthal, pre-war architect, militia artillery officer, landed at Gallipoli. I think it was on 25th of April he landed at 9 o'clock in the morning, wounded 3 times across the Gallipoli and the Western Front. And after the war, more noted for time in politics and bankruptcy. So I think he was probably a more successful army officer than he was a politician or businessman. But this is the chap that's in command of the 2nd Division, and it's him that's being thrust forward. Now, to say he's thrusting him forward, it's because of the direction that was given or allowed by Monash under Rawlinson's direction. So the army commander is Rawlinson, and this is what he says to Rawlinson. Monash says he was sorely perplexed by the uncertain attitude of the 4th Army. I was all for energetically pushing on, and I received Rawlinson's approval to do so on August 24th. But only 24 hours later, he enunciated a diametrically opposed policy, which left me greatly embarrassed. Intelligence from prisoners of war showed that the German 41st Division were now intent on reinforcing and stopping the German withdrawal. The revised Fourth Army policy showed it had done its fair share and was now to sit it out and wait, to mark time, waiting for replacements in men and tanks. So this policy of waiting was not really to Monash's liking. However, he goes on to say, there was one saving clause in the army attitude, and that gave me the loophole necessary for the continued action I desired to pursue. It was this: touch must be kept with the enemy. This was, of course, a mere nod to tactics, but it was sufficient to justify an aggressive policy on my part. And at that point, in late August, Rosenthal was told to carry out aggressive patrolling, more of that what was known as peaceful penetration that they'd been doing prior to the 100 days starting. And the advance was there to continue as soon as the patrollings revealed where the German positions were. You may have noticed on the last slide there the green diamond. That's because the 2nd Division used a diamond, and what we see here is, just for those that are interested in how these Australians use these patches. What interested me as well is, and I didn't know it before here, was that the New South Wales was obviously the most populous place, because one whole brigade out of each division was generally recruited from New South Wales. One whole brigade was recruited from Victoria, so that would be Melbourne. And then the last brigade was I think how we describe the others: Queensland, Tasmania, South and West Australia. And so the senior brigade wears the green flash, the 2nd brigade wears the red, and the last one is sort of an off colour, an off green colour. And then the different shapes dictate your division, and then the colours dictate which battalion you are within that. So it's quite a good organised system, and I do believe that lots of modern forces included in the British Army use a similar system today. So that will help you if you see those patches on their arms. You can drill down into which patches belong to which if you're trying to identify a relative. What were the Australians consisting of at this time, though? Just a nice few collection of photographs of here, of who they were, really. What was the Australian Corps like at this time? Don't forget, at no point did they actually agree to, or did implement, conscription. So these are guys that are all volunteers. They had a manpower shortage, just as I alluded to. They had started forming the 6th Australian Division, but the reason you never hear of it because it didn't deploy. So they closed the division down and used all of the guys that were in the 6th during training and on the home front, and they sent them forwards to backfill in some of the other divisions. So yeah, you know, by 1918, most of the troops that you're seeing at the front were not Gallipoli landing troops, because they'd already gone, probably killed, casualties or wounded in some way, and have been moved from the front line. But they are still turning up some cracking troops, and courage was certainly very much evident in all of the accounts of the Australians throughout the war, and certainly not any less here in 1918, even though some of them were fairly new arrived. But a typical read about typical units in the Australian forces by this time would reveal a good spread of veterans that had landed at Gallipoli, veterans that had fought at Bullecourt, at Pusières, and numerous others that you'll have heard of, 3rd Eaps, Passchendaele, intermingled with some new arrivals. So pretty much the story across the board for most of the British Army at the time. But there we are. There's some nice pictures of the Aussies just waiting before they go forwards. And just to show that it's not always just about the guys, here's Molly and Baldi, 2nd Division Signals Company horses getting new shoes. Now, if I remember rightly, Molly and Baldi had been in the service of the 2nd Division for 2 years, I think it was already, and they both survived the war, which is a nice story. I think one of them got rehomed in England after the war. So yeah, horses also serving. Now, the orders, therefore, that were thrown forward on the 31st of August 1918, the orders for the 17th Battalion, which is part of the 5th Brigade, 2nd Division, are reproduced for you here on one sheet of paper. Now, why is that of any importance? Well, if you remember 1916 and 15, and even into 1917, orders for attacks carried out by divisions run to multiple pages, dozens of pages, with addendums and distribution extras and appendixes and so forth and so forth. Honestly, they were enormous. But by 1918, the speed of these advances in this very much fluid environment, we have the 17th Battalion's orders here in 16 points, and the last one of which you see there is just acknowledge. Quite incredible, and that is an illustration of how things have become more streamlined by 1918, and impressive that the brigades and the battalions are able to take this and actually deliver it. They weren't, you know, saying, well, we need 5 other pages to tell us how to do things. These guys knew, you give us the times and the grids, a little bit of admin details, and they were able to get on with it. And this is proof of that in just one piece of paper. So let's move on into the battle itself and start drilling down into what battalions did what and get back on the battlefield. So we return to this map here, and we see the 2nd Division were in position. They've got this canal crossing here. It led them into nowhere because of this U-bend shape of the river here. The bridge had been blown in front of them, and they needed to cross this river. But what they found was that, of course, to cross a river, you needed a bridgehead on the other side, or you needed cover from fire, cover from view if possible. And they had none of that because this is higher ground around here. And the Germans still occupied this village here, Clery-sur-Somme. So to try and work with Royal Engineers, Australian Engineer Field Companies, in full view of the enemy, with machine guns, Minenwerfers and artillery batteries firing on them, it was going to be a no-hope scenario. So this is where Monash does pull off quite a feat. He dictates that we will side slip left to the north, and we will move the whole of the 2nd Division across Foyers Bridge, do a right flank move, bypass Clery-sur-Somme, and take up new positions there. So this is what goes on the night of the 30th to the 31st of August. This is moving the whole division quite some distance at night across a crossing point and into its start line. Now, I did say they bypass Clery. Well, they don't, in fact, bypass Clery because Clery is still held by the Germans. So actually, during the night, those battalions that are moving towards this start line here are having to fight their way through to their start line. So very uncertain nighttime manoeuvres to get them in position here, just shy of the Canal du Nord. So quite some achievement. But before I get carried away, with, if you like, with banging the drum for Monash, once he told them this, and this manoeuvre was carried out by Rosenthal and his brigadiers, Monash basically is out of the count. It's no longer his battle. Then, once he's just told them that's the manoeuvre they should carry out, it's the divisional and brigade commanders that carry this battle forward, and it's very much fought by those lower ranking officers, and they must take good credit for these manoeuvres, for this nighttime fighting, and for getting their men on the start line at 5 o'clock on the 31st of August. And this is where we line up. Now, don't be confused by the change in perspective here. using the satellite Earth. We're now in perspective of the Australians lining up for their start line, advancing on the Mont St Quentin area. We're on here. So essentially now, north is to the left of this map. Hopefully that hasn't confused you. This is just to allow you a view as if you were on a battlefield tour, bring you to this position along here. You'll be able to look across the Canal du Nord, or if you go out there yourself and you have a trip round, you'll be able to find these roads. This is where the start line was, looking towards the Mont St Quentin area. You can, of course, visit this area now. This is a track that you can walk all the way out following the line of advance without getting in anyone's way or anything like that. It's a nice part of the battlefield, rising up amongst crops. So that's why I've turned that battle round now. Australian lined up 5th Brigade in the front line. They fight their way through into these positions on the night just before the 31st of August. 20th Battalion on the left, 17th Battalion in the centre. Remember, these are their coloured diamond shapes that they wear on their shoulders, and the 19th on the right. The Canal du Nord was not wet. Don't forget, most of the places across this image here, it was partially dug or marked out and not completed. There's the shout for no quarter given. This was mainly by the men of the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, which was the divisional machine gun sections. They were attached, complete with the battalions, a number of Vickers and Lewis guns being added to the firepower. Now, these battalions are way below strength. Don't forget, this is a best part of a brigade lining up here, but it was only 1,200 men. There was probably 300 or 400 men representing each battalion as it goes forward. 17th had the slightly stronger amount in the battalion, holding the centre line, but certainly the 19th and the 20th were only in the region of 300 men for a battalion, which is about 35% of what they normally would have. Who's the enemy? 14th Bavarian 38th Division, and arriving just the night or so before was the 2nd Prussian Guards Division, amongst with the Prince Alexander Regiment and the Kaiser Alexander Regiment and the Kaiserin Augusta Regiment, which have as much history and tradition as, if you like, the Grenadier Guards. I don't know if they're quite as good as the Grenadier Guards, but they certainly are well known amongst the German forces of the time, and certainly very well known amongst the Prussians. So they were moved up. This was one of Ludendorff's crack reserve units, and I think it's testament to the vital position of Mont St Quentin and Peronne that this division is deployed by him on the 30th stroke 31st of August, and they are pushed in to stop the Australians who realises are teetering on the edge of getting across the Somme and up into Peronne. So that's the start line at 5 o'clock, with the battalions lined up thus. And their lines of advance would take them generally across the Canal du Nord and up towards the village on the left of Fouillancourt, the Mont St Quentin area, and then this is the area of Peronne that's now much more built up than it was in the past. If ever you needed, if you were visiting, one little marker, I think it is about here on the map, there's an old cemetery marked on the trench maps. Maybe we'll see it in one of the other slides. And that was there in 1918, and that's still there today. So it's one of those things that you can line up present day maps with older maps by using either road systems or things that were there during the trench map construction. Lovely painting here of one of the moments in time, if you like, of the fighting on Mont St Quentin. And you can see lots of detail in there. The Lewis gunner being prevalent, firing his .303 rounds from that. fighting, calling for help. Perhaps here, 2 Germans without their weapons have been captured. It looks like these guys here, with bayonets fixed, are clearing out a dugout, and they're looking up to the Mont. A lot more barbed wire shown on here, but you get the idea of how bare this was, looking up to the top. There was woods on the top. There was the buildings that had been largely destroyed by shell fire, and yeah, this plate here, if it was called a glacis, described as a glacis, devoid of cover in front of the men. So the 3 attacking battalions go forward. The 17th were up the middle, and as they stood at 5 o'clock, they were encouraged to shout and create as much noise as they could to convince the Germans that there was a lot more of them coming than there actually was. So perhaps the way this was, got this painting of this chap here, and he's shouting and hollering to try and scare the Germans into thinking perhaps our forces were more ferociously numbered, more ferocious and more numbered than actually had. So having charged forward, we mentioned artillery barrage. You can see in the painting there a bit of artistic license. It's described pretty dismally and feebly by most of the accounts of this, because there just wasn't enough of the guns to provide a barrage, and because the whole move up had been fairly fluid. There wasn't enough time to move that heavy artillery with the congested roads into position. But Monash and Rosenthal didn't want to pause the battle. They wanted to keep that contact with the enemy, keep touch with the enemy, and therefore they knew that they should send the infantry forward as quick as they could and not be held back by the need for fire plans. So artillery was going to be attached for almost close support with batteries of guns supporting each company of each battalion. And some of those guns were moving forwards, some of them were firing, and some of them were in depth. But of course, there was no radio still, and much of the time they were calling down fire. It had to be done by runners and signal messages, and then there was always that dreadful delay. But they were able to provide a little bit of support, and a little bit of pre-registered fire was falling down as the men jumped forward. So the 17th Battalion in the middle ran up the hill. Sergeant Rickson was so quick with a Lewis gun, he managed to jump into a post held by a number of the enemy before they even fired a shot. He killed 3 and took 30 prisoners. The Germans began running further back, running from trench to trench, and as they did so, the Lewis gunners would either take a knee or they would fire across the shoulder of their number 2, you know, the number 1 and the number 2 would fire, and number 1 would fire the gun, number 2 would help with the ammunition and what have you. So the number 1 would literally lean the Lewis gun across the shoulder of the number 2 to get a bit of accuracy. And thus the Germans were kept on the move. And then it says they basically were running tired, and each time they appeared out of a trench that someone else was clearing, more of them would get shot, and they ended up running further and further up the hill until there was no more Germans seen running any further away. So back to the trench map here, just to allow you to see that progress crossing the Canal du Nord. The 20th role was to protect the 17th. The 17th are trying to achieve the prize, if you like, which is to take the higher ground and clear the point of the village. This is actually the modern road that is still there today. It still follows the same line. It's about a mile just north of Peronne, Mont St Quentin. If you blink, you miss the gap between the two now, but obviously in 1918 there was a fair amount of gap. But this area here that you can see with Über Alles Trench and Gottmit Unz Trench, that was a big space of that glacis on the forward slope, if you like, but much built over today. But the area that these 3 battalions are advancing up in 19 does resemble pretty much what it did back then. It hasn't been built upon, so it's good to visit that, and one of those areas that you can get a good idea of what the battlefield was like in 1918. So the 20th were told to advance to the road, see if they could get beyond that and provide protection. the 17th going up the middle. Meanwhile, the 19th were going to exploit spaces on the right flank and try and protect any from any counterattacks that would arrive in that direction. The 20th on the north side were checked initially by fire from the village of Fillicourt and coming from the north side of what would be now the Canal du Nord. The reason that fire was coming from north of there was because there was a much slower advance by some troops to the north, of which we'd have to talk about on another day. So the 20th are slowed initially, but it's eventually brought under the machine guns firing from Fillicourt are brought under accurate fire from Lewis guns and some Stokes mortars, which have been brought forward with them as well. I think it was a number of, it was maybe 6 Stokes were forward with the battalion and were firing, very much in close support, and that put pay to the positions down there. There was a big problem with a lack of grenades by only a few hours into the battle here, mainly reported by the 20th on this left flank. And one chap, Sergeant Horton, was told to clear a number of German positions in Oder Trench, and he basically sent reports back that they urgently needed more grenades and more rifle grenade cups, but he was carrying on clearing the German dugouts just by firing his rifle down the stairs, and it was enough to make some of the Germans come out and surrender. But obviously a much more effective weapon would have been the Mills bomb. And lastly, having got to the road up here, the Australians are finding a little bit of cover on the west side of the road because it had a slight embankment to it, just a slight raising of the road. That's where they took a bit of cover, and they then found a culvert just by doing a bit of reconnaissance that ran underneath the road. And at one point, Major MacDonald decides to go through this culvert to see if he can find a way forward to allow the battalion to proceed. And when he does so, he actually stumbles into a group of Germans on the other side of the culvert who equally were looking for a way to come through or over the road. And he very quickly shoots 2 of them with his revolver, captures another dozen, and brings them back through the culvert and reports back on what the Germans are doing. What he finds is, and from a quick interrogation, they find that the Germans appear to be looking at Fouillancourt as a route to flank this attack of Mont St Quentin. What they were doing was there was a dug section of Canal du Nord here. They were feeding in reinforcements along the canal bed, and then they were turning them up the embankment of Fouillancourt. And then obviously what they would have done was found that culvert had Major MacDonald not stopped them, and that would have allowed them to come down the road completely covered and then underneath the culvert, underneath the road. So a good bit of recce carried out by Major MacDonald. However, further fire, machine gun mainly, coming from the area on here marked as hit, talk about that more often, was raining down on the embankment. Germans brought up 2 77mm field guns on the far north of the Canal du Nord and were firing those into the flank of the 20th Battalion as well, pretty much down the road. And that fire got worse as the afternoon went on the 31st, and the battalion were forced back to this kind of sunken lane and to these trenches here. So they made a good advance, but as the afternoon wore on, they were turned back. It was the same story for the 17th. They'd come through the centre of the village, which was obviously in ruins. They'd got to the area, what some of them refer to as the plantation, others to just the wood at the rear, and they were turned back. And further to the south, 19th Battalion had made it to the line of Ober-Alles Trench, which you can see here. Red lines denote where later in the afternoon, at about 5:30 p.m, 2 German counterattacks massed and came forward, one following the line of this track and lane, through the cratered area, and another one up past the sugar factory and into the face of the 19th Battalion. And this was enough that, although they got to their objectives, as you probably heard in many other discussions or read in books, taking the objective is one thing, but holding on to it in the face of counterattack is another. So late in the afternoon of the 31st, they pull back, and these little crescent shapes now coming up on the map show where the battalions found themselves as the afternoon wore on and towards dusk. They'd finally got in contact with each other on their left and their right, because initially it was very confusing. There was so few of them, 25 to 35% casualties as well, although their numbers started so small. And they'd now suffered 20 to 35% casualties. But they'd sent out flanking scouts to make contact with each other, and thus it was how night falls on the 31st of August. The progress thus far. So although they've achieved it on the first night, they were knocked back a little bit, and darkness was end of play on the first day. Moving forward then to the 1st of September, as described as the empty battlefield, and that was described because as men were arriving to look forwards to what they could see further up, like forward observers. Sir Charles Bean arrives on the battlefield, the Australian official history writer. They describe it as rather empty because everyone is in the ground. They can sometimes see little Brody helmets moving along, which is obviously helpful for them to spot those. But most of the Germans and most of the Australians are actually moving around in the trenches, being forced down there by the machine gun and shrapnel fire. So they couldn't see too much, but that is where the positions were, that the runners had gone back, and they held an O group at staff headquarters, and they made plans for the next day. And that is going to be a resumption of the attack. And this time it's going to be the 6th Brigade, so same division. And the 3 battalions move up overnight, and they get into position about 4 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of September. 24th Battalion on the left, who tuck in just behind the guys that had fought up to the road the night before. 23rd Battalion on the right, who are going to support the attack on the main village itself. And the 21st Battalion were to come up through what was known on the trench maps as Brasso Redoubt, and be in a position an hour or so after the others go forward, perhaps, to fill in that gap. As you can see, the line of advance for each battalion was generally straight up, but it would, as they diverge, if you like, it would leave a gap around this area here and the cemetery here. And the 21st were going to plug that gap and then support whichever battalion needed it to achieve their objectives. So that's going to be the 6th Brigade coming up the next morning. Are you with me? And there we have the direction of travel for the next day's planned battles. 24th up the middle. So what happens on the 21st of, on the 1st of September? We're going to talk about all 3 battalions. We're going to talk about these 3 guys that get the Victoria Cross. Let's start in the north with the 24th Battalion. And here we have a series of photographs here, which really are quite incredible. And this is the 24th Battalion in a trench about 1:20 p.m. on the 1st of September. Just waiting for the barrage to lift. They are the same as the day before in that they are hideously under strength. One company that we know of a lot is featured in the next few photographs as the 21st Battalion, and this is the 24th, but they were on their left, and this is a whole platoon. That is a platoon of men that you can see there. So hideously under strength. It's essentially a single section, and that was the norm on the Battle of Mont St Quentin. I just love the detail that you can get from these pictures. If you start to zoom in, there's their patches that I talk about, which you can tell which is which. You've got a Lewis gun and a Lewis gun here. This is what they were doing by 1918. They were realizing that this section here of so many men, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 men, was far more effective and lethal if it utilized its Lewis guns. And the men basically that weren't firing were acting as protection teams and ammunition carriers for the 2 Lewis gunners. There's even a Vickers gun up here. Look, you can see that with a sheet over it. Here's Lewis gun ammunition, leather pouches. Here's more. Each one's got a magazine, a drum magazine with 47 rounds in. This was generally fired in the prone. Here we have one without the magazine on it. Generally fired advisory in the prone, but as you've heard, all operators of this by 1918 had learned how to fire it on the move. Firing from the hip was definitely discouraged, but many accounts of them say they fired at the hip, hosing down the enemy. And as I said earlier in that account, they would often fire the Lewis gun from the shoulder of their number 2, if it was a quick reactionary shot. The other thing of note here, take a look at this. This is Lee Enfield that this chap's got here. There's something here, and I believe that is a signal flag that he's carrying with his rifle, so that he can signal back whether it was to say this is just where we are, or to ask for help, or recognition, most likely though. So a lovely little cameo of the 24th Battalion there, just waiting to go forward. And this is a few minutes later, the same chaps, bayonets fixed, moving up the line, to support the attack on the road that runs from Mont St Quentin up towards the Canal du Nord. So quite unusual for the Great War to be able to have photographs one after another showing a series of events. And this is the one where actually we've managed to, not we, Australians have managed to name who this is. So this is the 21st Battalion, the ones that were sort of reserves on the second day. This is A Company, Captain James Sullivan, who sadly is killed only a few weeks later in October. It's MC and Bar MM. So quite a character, very good officer, I'm sure, by that time, very experienced. There he is, probably a pencil in his mouth rather than a cigarette, I dare say. But this is with the 21st Battalion, Elsa Trench. This is their jump off on the 1st of September. And a few minutes later, they're moving forward to support the other battalions. And the series of photographs are quite incredible. Here we are. This is what was described as the brick wall. And it's surrounded most of Mont St Quentin, certainly on the south side, facing where the Australians were coming from, south and west. There used to be a large church here and a sort of country home, if you like, and we believe that the large, very expensive as it would have been, brick wall was to mark the end of this country estate or the church. Can't see too much of it today, but we did find a few vestiges of brick walls that don't appear to be parts of houses when we visit on a few battlefield tours. But yeah, lots of the veterans' accounts do recall this, this brick wall, and this is a photograph just taken only a few minutes later after that first one. This is Captain Sullivan's unit probably going forward. It doesn't say so, but it's likely that once that camera was there with one unit, the chances are he'd stay with them. You'd probably have a little bit of an affinity. They'd be swapping cigarettes and taking the mickey out of each other probably. So, and the photographer wouldn't have had time to move very far, so because it's only a few minutes after. So the chances are this is one of those platoons moving forward, but it's a cracking photograph. And that line of those trees is actually the road that if you were to drive up from Peronne to Mont St Quentin, that's the road that you'd be driving on. So on your left, as it were, these troops would have been crashing through the undergrowth, through the broken wall. What they said was surprising was that more use wasn't made by the Germans of this wall. They were fired at from the wall, but they were expecting it to be literally like a Hougoumont, Battle of Waterloo type scenario with guys coming over the top, firing through the loopholes and that. There was a few, but not as many as they expected. Now another photograph, same man, late afternoon. So now they've made it to the road. The camera's caught up. So those trees that I pointed out, and these are the telegraph poles of the same road. This is a position which we believe, if you were to drive up this road now, just a few yards further on, if you look to your left, that would pretty much put where the Australian Divisional Memorial is today. So that's pretty much where we're certain that is. This, again, amazing detail in this photograph. Look at this chap here sitting, waiting to go forward. There's his officer with his revolver, picking his way forward, probably with a sergeant behind him, waiting for orders. The officer doing a bit of a recce. If you zoomed in on this same position and the same soldier with almost this same kit, you could actually be in Normandy in 1944. You just switch your search images for a few British soldier pictures of Normandy 1944. These are the same, or indeed Americans. So we are no longer fighting in the trenches of the 1st of July. Look how far these chaps have come. They've had to learn how to fight this way, and they've reacted to it, and they are now doing it. With that one page of orders, they're now fighting in open warfare with one page to follow. Incredible photograph there, the last one of the series. And in a little bit of detail there, that shows how the battalions got on in the afternoon. They advanced forwards. On the left-hand side, the 24th Battalion. And attached to them was a machine gunner, Lieutenant Edgar Towner, with the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, and he gets a Victoria Cross for his actions working with that battalion that day. And I'll quote his citation for you. "Foremost conspicuous bravery, initiative and devotion to duty. On the 1st of September 1918, on the attack on Mont St Quentin, when in charge of 4 Vickers guns. During the early stages of the advance, he located and captured, single-handed, an enemy machine gun, which was causing casualties, and by turning it on the enemy, inflicted even further severe losses. Subsequently, by the skillful tactical handling of his guns, cut off and captured 25 of the enemy. Later, by fearless reconnaissance under fire and by the energy, foresight and promptitude with which he brought fire to bear on various enemy groups, he gave valuable support to the infantry advance. Again, when short of ammunition, he secured an enemy machine gun which he mounted and fired in full view of the enemy, causing the enemy to retire further and enabling our infantry to advance. Under this fire, although wounded, he maintained a fire of his gun at a very critical period. During the night, he steadied and gave valuable support to a small detached post. By his coolness and cheerfulness, inspirited the men in a great degree. Throughout the night, he kept close watch by personal reconnaissance on the enemy movements and was evacuated exhausted 30 hours after being wounded. Valour and resourcefulness of Lieutenant Towner undoubtedly saved a very critical situation, contributed largely to the success of the attack." Quite some action, and that's the exact area between the road and this position here, which is a track which you can walk along. That's the area that he carries out those actions. Just further to the south is another Victoria Cross. awarded to Sergeant Albie Lowerson of the 21st Battalion. They're the guys moving up the middle to plug in the gap. And it's known as the Lowerson VC, and it's quite something. When very strong opposition was met with early in the attack, every foot of ground was stubbornly contested. Regardless of heavy enemy fire, Sergeant Lowerson moved about fearlessly, directing his men, encouraging them to still greater effort, and finally leading on to the objective. On reaching the objective, he saw that the left attacking party was held up by an enemy strongpost heavily manned with 12 machine guns. Under the heaviest sniping and machine gun fire, Lowerson rallied 7 men as a storming party and directed them to attack the flanks while he rushed the strong point. By effective bombing, he captured it, together with 12 machine guns and 30 prisoners. Though severely wounded in the thigh, he refused to leave the front until the prisoners had been disposed of and the organisation and consolidation of the post had been completed. Throughout a week of operations, his leadership and example had a continual influence on the men serving under him. His prompt and effective action at a critical junction allowed the forward movement to be carried on without delay, thus ensuring the success of the attack. Quite something there for Albie Lowerson, and we'll come back to that particular action and where it takes place in a short while, which is marked here, and it just says pit, not to be confused with pit here and old quarry here. So if you're reading about this action, make use of the trench maps that are available, because it can be a little bit confusing. And if you're walking the ground, it's not easy to find some of this now. There's a little bit more woodland around the back of Mont St Quentin. But what helps us is this position here, the little cemetery which is still there today. This is the sunken lane where Towner had his 2 machine guns firing into the pit as well. So if you want to know where the first part of his VC is, it's down this slightly sunken lane just off of the main road. So this is the pit or old quarry, as they're talking about, which Lowerson organises the attack on. And the battalion, the unit that he organises into the attack is number 9 platoon. And there's one of the chaps there. And now 9 platoon in the 21st Battalion are an unusual mob because they've left accounts of this action. There was only 11 of them in 9 platoon, just like that picture you saw a few minutes ago of the 24th Battalion. Number 9 platoon of the 21st Battalion is possibly one of the most written about platoons, certainly in this action and at this point in the war, in the whole of the AIF. 6 of them wrote accounts in one form or another out of that 11, as well as Bean and a number of others in the battalion headquarters mentions them. So there's so many accounts of what these guys get up to. It's now in a book by Peter Stanley, the Men of Mont St Quentin, and in particular is this chap here, is Frank Roberts. He's a member of number 9 platoon. He'd written diaries to his dear wife in the picture here, Nancy, and he's one of them. So they describe the sun beating down on Elsa Trench at the start of the attack, packed with the dead. This is a corroborated account, sort of consolidated for the sake of tonight. But with those small platoon, what they've done is exactly the same. They organised 2 4-man Lewis gun teams, an officer and a couple of runners, Royce Mearden, Jack Castle, Frank Roberts, Charlie Toniella were the first team, and the second team was Ted Heath, no relation, Bill Rabling, Albert Kelly, known as Alf, and Noble Norwood. They were commanded by Sergeant Vic Edwards, and Alf Crawford was the runner. So that was their whole platoon that I've named there, and it's all, they built their platoon remainder around these 2 Lewis guns. And it's their section, number 9 platoon, that are actually the guys that helped capture the crater. And this very sorry picture here is the remnants of that crater, with poor old Frank Roberts, who doesn't make it, and the number of other men of the 21st Battalion buried right where they fell, taking the machine gun position that the Victoria Cross, Albie Lowson, is remembered for. And there's an awful way of the family for Frank Roberts finding out. It was, "I regret to inform you that London advises your cablegram of 14th of August addressed to Private Roberts as being undeliverable owing to the addressee being killed in action." So that's how Frank Roberts' death was telegraphed, if you like, to the family. It was not in the normal way that you would expect. It was even a more sad occasion because they had no idea that he'd been killed in action. They'd sent a parcel, and it was a sort of return telegram saying we can't deliver it because he's been killed. So they didn't even know at that point. So really, really sad. There's the chaps that are all named on the cross. These are all the 21st Battalion guys that die on the 1st of September. Frank Roberts, which we've just seen, Corporal Kelly was with him, Alfie, and Roy Smearden was his #1 gunner. So they're the three from number 9 platoon. The others are also members of the 21st Battalion. Most of them are commemorating on this cross before they were reinterred at Peronne and Hem cemeteries nearby. Lovely painting there, famous painting of the Peronne battlefield, courtesy of the IWM. This was by Francis Hodge. This was taken sort of perspective-wise, if you like, from more the south side of the battlefield. There's Peronne, and there's the hill burning in the background, but it gives you an idea of what the battlefield was like in 1918. Peronne itself, I know I said I would have to talk. You'll have to find about that on another night. We haven't got time for it all, but Peronne town is taken by men of the Australians on and around the next 2 days, up to the 3rd, 4th of September. And there's a picture of how ruined Peronne was by this time. Lovely little group. There again, there's the Lewis gun. This guy sitting with his grenade ready to go. This guy's got a torch, signaling torch. Wire stretching out across the road. Little units, that's how the army is fighting by 1918. Very much similar to how the army would operate today. Nice then and now that you can do from the picture of this building inside Peronne today. You can line it up. There's a tank that arrived sometime later. Certainly wasn't there when the Aussies took it. And a sign left by the Germans, which basically says, "Don't be angry, be in amazement or have wonder." And it was a comment that they made about how well they could destroy Peronne. Much of the damage to Peronne had been by artillery fire, but they'd added to it by destroying much of it in their scorched earth policy as they were pushed out the back door by the Australians. So that's a little bit about Peronne, so it's worth visiting. There's the 2nd Australian Divisional Memorial that I mentioned very briefly. Why is it 2 different memorials? Well, this one on the left is the original. In the Second World War, when the Germans came back into France, they decided they didn't like the Russian Eagle being bayoneted by the Aussie, and they took it away, and it was never seen again. Whether they blew it up or not, I don't know, but it was certainly removed from sight. And this, I have to say, striking memorial was put up in its place. Lovely detail, lots of information underneath it as well. Was the replacement some years later. So that's the 2nd Division Memorial. Frank Roberts, that's his grave. And that is none other than Sir John Monash visiting Frank Roberts' grave. Now you might ask why a young private in number 9 platoon of the 21st Battalion would have his photographs of his grave taken by an Australian general. And May 1919, and it wasn't known why this photograph had been taken, and everyone was wondering why it had been. It was found out to be later that this is Monash's daughter, and Monash's daughter was singing in a choir and an orchestra in London after the war, and she became friends with what was Frank Roberts' uncle's son, and or daughter, son or daughter, forget which, sorry, but anyway, Frank Roberts' uncle's family. And they spoke to her, befriended her in London, and said, if you're going out to France, which they knew they were, would you mind taking a picture of the grave of Frank Roberts? They gave him his details, and when they were touring round with Monash and his daughter, they stopped the car and said that they wanted to visit the grave, and Monash wasn't really sure why they were going to this one grave, and she persuaded him to have his photograph taken next to it. And the photograph was taken by the driver that they had at the time, because her camera had run out of film. So it was only years later that the photograph was, into more wider circulation, and the story came full circle as to how it was taken and why. Frank's wife, unfortunately, was pregnant at the time of 1918. Frank never saw the baby, and he's now buried at Peronne Cemetery. David.
Julian, thanks very much indeed. That was absolutely splendid. You slightly caught me out there at the end, so
that's all right.
But thank you very much indeed for a superb presentation, showing a really detailed really detailed account of the attack of the Australians at.
My pleasure.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I've thoroughly enjoyed that, and I know everybody's put their hands up already anticipating what I'm going to say next, which is, if you enjoyed that, please raise your hands using the raise hand button underneath. So thanks very much for that, and take it as read, Julian, that we've already had a massive round of applause for that. It's Q&A time now, folks. So using the Q&A button underneath on the Zoom software, I'll try and get through as many questions as we can in the time available. I'll just ask one now straight away, just while so that everybody else is possibly typing questions in.
Sure.
So Robert Riddle asks this: since and I think you'll be able to deal with this one in a roundabout way because we discussed it in the rehearsal. Since cameras were strictly forbidden, were these photographs taken covertly?
No, this was one of the official photographer guys moving around that would normally be further behind the lines, and I think what we were deducing from this, I'm not an expert on their use, but what we're pretty confident is their official photography, and the reason they weren't there on the first day was because this was a very fluid time of battle. This is not the big set piece thing where everyone's got days and days and days to prepare. This is a fluid part of the battle, and that affects the cameras as well. So they're actually arriving on the battlefield in a sort of an ad hoc way, just like some of the troops were. And so none of them are there on the first day. They're probably not in position to get up with the troops. But by the time of the first day, 1st of September, or second day of the battle, we believe that that's when these cameras arrive. That's when Bean arrives. He's actually watching 21st Battalion and Captain Sullivan and all the photography going on. That's when he's there as well. He doesn't see the first day of battle either. So I think those two probably were not far apart from each other. So yeah, normally cameras prohibited. I think these are official photographers with the army, carrying on that way.
Super, right. Thanks for that, Julian. Right, Peter, over to you. Your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm slightly revising it as I normally do, David.
No worries, it's all right. Go for it.
I became more slightly aware of what was going on as Julian was going through. It sort of struck me as odd, really, that 2nd Division crossed the river in front of 3 Div Does that not mean then that 3 Div had no role, or did they sort of attack in echelon after 2 Div had passed through them?
Right, thanks, Peter. Yeah, got you there. That's probably because I didn't explain it particularly well. 3 Div are active. If you're like, there should be attacking together like this. 2nd Division, they can't get forwards because of the river.
Yeah.
So they come up and they go through 3rd Division, north of the river, and then come around next to them. Yeah, but just to fill in. So 3rd Division side slips slightly to allow 2nd Division to get in position but cross the river, and then they come in alongside each other, left and right. So 3rd Division, not passive throughout, but it's not their main show. They're attacking a little bit like a flanking attack to stop obvious reinforcements catching 2nd Division in the flank.
Right.
Does that help?
Excellent. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers, Peter. Thanks for that. We've got another question from Kieran Moore, but unfortunately I can't get Kieran onto the screen. So Kieran asks this: Julian, were the infantry supported by engineers in the assault?
Not read of it. Not in the front line, but they were very, very busy in the assault crossing the river. That was their main job at this time. It was big bridge building because once Cleary is cleared on the north bank by the troops moving forward on the 31st of August, it allowed the crossing at Omicourt to be completed. You know, they couldn't cross it before because the Germans had it under observation and under fire. So the main role of the engineers at this point was not a real combat role going up the hill. It was to keep the roads open and to build those bridges. It's all about building those bridges, because if they fall or if they can't open enough of those bridges, you can't get the artillery forward, those grenade dischargers, that we can't squeeze them all across the crossings that we have. So that's the engineers are very busy, very much in action, but they were in a supporting role at that point, of doing traditional engineer stuff, which is building bridges and roads.
Okay, thanks for that. If anybody's wanting to ask any questions, now's the time, because we don't actually have that many questions coming through. So if anybody's been missing out on previous webinars and wants to get in with the question here, as I say, now's the opportunity. Jeffrey, do you want to unmute yourself there?
Thank you. Thanks very much for the talk. How important was the role of the RFC in this battle?
Oh, well, the RFC. The only thing I can probably add to what knowledge you've got about the Royal Flying Corps at this time is they were very much true to their role of the time, in that it was about contact. Rather than interdicting the Germans on the top of the hill, their job was to, and I did read about this just the other day, was contact patrols, telling those in command how far forward our troops had got. And they had started this training system where the RFC plane would fly forward, and it would have a streamer let out the back of the plane, which would tell the men on the ground that that was their aircraft they should look to. And that would be flowing a streamer of a certain colour or a stripe. That would tell them, this is the plane that we need to signal to where our position was. The aircraft could also let out a sort of, almost, it was described like a trumpet sound, a buzzer or a hooter in a certain method. That would also help identify their plane. And then what the guys on the ground would do would be either use flags, or they would send up flares in certain colours, which would tell the man on the air that they're the troops that I'm looking for. So there was this primitive way of communicating between the aircraft above and the soldiers below that would allow the two to communicate. And that was telling brigadiers and divisional commanders and army commanders how far forward our troops have got. So that's how the RFC are important in this. It's signalling and it's spotting the enemy and telling our own guys how far people have got. More than that, I haven't got for you right now.
Okay, thanks for your question there, Jeffrey. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, Joe Joyce. Do you want to just unmute yourself?
Yes, hi. Great talk. And my question is a simple one, actually. One of the photographs showed the Australians going into the attack with full packs. Was that standard procedure? At least it looked like they were carrying full packs.
Yeah, Joe, great question and very topical. Completely topical, and you know, that question could be asked of troops going into action in Iraq and Afghanistan and at Mont St Quentin. And it's ever the right question to ask of an infantryman. One, has he got enough kit? Two, has he got too much kit? And that question is still with us, and the debate will always range. If you look at modern social medias and Facebooks and Instagrams and all of that sort of stuff that are talked about by US Marine Corps guys, British paras and Royal Marines, that debate still goes on today. It was standard practice at the time to carry that amount of kit forward, because that, although it looks like full pack, that's basically the essentials for a couple of days. And it's ironic, or it's great that you ask it. I'm guessing you may be North American of some description, Joe. But the Marines at the moment in America, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, they basically have, when they go forwards today, they have to be self-sufficient for at least 48 hours in any theatre, because they're out on their own. They're an expeditionary unit. And so it was with the Brits, the Australians, Canadians in 1918. When they went forward, they had to be self-sufficient for 48 hours. Basically, you're on your own. You might not get a single bullet or pair of socks to you for 2 days. So you need all that kit. You know, you've got your drinking, you've got your eating, and you've got your ammo, and you have got a spare pair of socks. That was what they carried then. And sometimes they would ditch some of that kit at the last minute for the last 30-yard dash on shore, you know, just like they would do today. And speaking to veterans of various combat in the last few years as well, they like to fight light. You know, they like to ditch it all because they'd rather move fast than be encumbered by body armor. And I'm sure it was the same in 1918.
Thank you.
Joe.
Great, thanks for your question there, Joe. Okay, next up, Ian Adams. Ian, do you just want to mute yourself?
Yeah, there you go. Thanks for the talk. Did these troops find the same horrendous number of booby traps as they entered Peronne as reported by the 5th Warwickshires in March 1917, who reported the same poster? Or I'm assuming there were quite a few of those posters put up by the Germans as they retreated.
Don't know about how many was it the Warwicks you mentioned there? Don't know how many they encountered, but there were some, and haven't read too much about stuff in Peronne yet because that wants to be another day. But I know that they had mined a lot of the tracks with what they call contact mines. Now again, I need to find a ordnance expert of 1918 that will tell me what that is, because most of us think of mines more like being things in the Second World War and more modern conflicts, don't we? But they're described as contact mines to destroy tanks and trucks moving forward. But booby traps were a real big feature of all German withdrawals, weren't they? You know, cunning things which would have been great thing if it was put there by a Tommy or an Australian, creative, you know, British sort of thing. But when it's the Germans, it's a sort of fiendish thing that they do, isn't it? But of course, it was done by both sides, and I'm sure Sure, there were some there, but maybe, I don't know, Ian, but maybe thinking about sort of on my feet a little bit here, they weren't really quite as ready to pull back from Peronne. They didn't, you know, we came from a different direction to which they expected. They expected an attack straight across the river or from the south. We caught them out with our no long barrage, you know, the speed of the advance and crossing where we did and attacking from the north. I think it caught them out. So therefore, the quicker we can catch them out, the less chances they've got of putting those, you know, fiendish traps in. But sorry, I can't give you any more.
That's good. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian, for your question there. Okay, next question is going to be from Arthur, but this is representative of quite a number of very similar questions. So forgive me if I'm not pulling everybody up to ask the same question. Arthur, you're asking it on behalf of a number of people. Please carry on.
Thank you, Julian. Excellent talk about an area I was not familiar with. From listening to your talk, it appears from first glance that it was a very easy victory from understaffed Australian divisions. Does this mean that the Germans also were very understaffed, or were we just better at it?
I think we're probably better at it by 1918. Like I said, just to the previous question, by 1918, I think we were better than them at it. And it wasn't their ball game. They were really throwing troops in a manner that wasn't conducive to really running a battle very well. Morale was down, our morale was up. Our numbers were down, but our quality of troops that were still in the battle was probably better than theirs a lot. And they just couldn't cope with the hammer blow effect that we were having on them. And it's probably a mistake on my behalf if you've perceived it as an easy battle. And I should have spent more time talking about casualties, maybe. 30% casualties, even in those depleted battalions, is not an easy success. We took over 2,000 prisoners, and they've got the best part of, I think, 5 or 6 on paper divisions involved in the battle against us. I can see in one of the other questions as well there, David, someone said about what were the comparative strengths of those forces. And I haven't got the exact figure to hand, but both sides are suffering massively from figures on paper, which look like full divisions. The actual reality on both sides is probably, you know, down to 30% of what it should have been. German propaganda suggested after the war and you know, just after the event and afterwards, was that these were new Australian fresh divisions, you know, fresh for the fight, fully at strength, and our illustrious Kaiser, Augusta regiments and everything did all they could to stop them, but were outnumbered and everything. Well, they weren't outnumbered, but they were outperformed on the day. You know, with courage, speed of and dash and elan. That's what carried the day. And they're Australians and not Brits. So you know, from our point of view, being a Brit, it's hard to say that sometimes. But these are some of the best troops that we've got. I'm sure myself. I'm going off topic here, but I'm sure if this had been a Canadian unit, it would have fought just as well. And if it had been an English division or a Scottish division, it would have fought just as well. There we are. The Australians were Johnny on the spot, and they did perform really well.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, Arthur. Cheers.
Thanks, Arthur. Malcolm, I don't know if your video's not working, but if you can just unmute yourself.
Very interesting talk, and thank you, Julian, for that. A bit of an obscure question, actually. My grandfather, Bombardier Joseph Arthur Toy, hence where the Sperring toy comes from, when he married Maud Elizabeth Sperring in 1906. But anyway, that's by the by. He transferred from the 286 Siege Battery Royal Garrison Artillery to the Australian ration dump, according to his war history records, on the 7th of August 1918, following his involvement in the Third Battle of Aisne, which was May-June 18. He was, I think it was because of his age he was transferred, because he was 40 at the time. And I believe that this was on the Somme, this Australian ration dump. Any idea where the dumps were, and were rations food, or might they have been munitions or anything like that? Does that sort of ring any bells?
Well, rations would only really, I think, refer to food.
A lucky man.
Sorry?
A lucky man there.
Yeah. So he probably had a few sandwiches away when he could, and no doubt a few extra rum rations. So as far as I'm aware, rations would only be food. Where that was, I have absolutely no idea. I've actually got the official history from being Australians now, and as I was reading your question, I flicked to the back to look up ration in case Australian ration dump was marked, and just having a quick look, I can't see that mentioned. That all it says in sub paragraphs of the index is that shortages were there, and then it mentions the word rum. So I'm sorry I can't answer you anymore. But
he got doubts, so he probably all the rum.
All right. I think, in the words of many a judge, case proven.
Okay, thanks, Malcolm, for your question. Right, last couple of questions here. So I'm going to ask James. James Hayday, are you able to unmute yourself there?
Yes, I am. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, fire away.
Oh, yeah. Basically, what it was, Julian, I was intrigued about the statue that you showed of the 2nd Australian Division with the Australian originally bayonet in the Prussian Eagle.
Yeah.
I was lucky I went there in 2018 to actually see the site,
Yeah.
but it always intrigued me as to why it got destroyed or blown up, but why didn't they actually replace the statue as it was meant to be? Why did they change the design? As if you look at the battlefield, it's stunning how they managed to cross that open ground, take that hill. I thought it really depicted really their valor on the day, and then they've just given you like a single man looking there. But the other one was more poignant, really, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to anyone else that can chip in and actually give us a definitive, like what the Australians say about that, and whether there's an actually document that is. I've not come across it. I hadn't actually looked. I've got to say, I just know the story that it was there. Then the Germans took it away, and what's now been put in its place. I suppose by the time that was replaced, relations had started to change with some of those countries. Living in slightly different times. I don't know, maybe it's heading in that direction, that maybe it was thought that it was time for a more contemplative Aussie, digger to be put on that plinth. I mean, I love both of them, and I'd be equally happy to stand and photograph and gawp at either of them. And I love the replacement, but had the original one been there, I'd probably have been even more in awe of the architectural, the sculptor and what have you. It was fantastic, but I can kind of see that. I'm pretty certain they had a similar one on Hill 60 at Eeps, didn't they? That was blown up by Germans in 1940.
Yeah, there's been a few, hasn't there, that sort of disappeared from their original design, which is a shame.
Yeah. So I've not seen it in writing, in an official document as to why it wasn't replaced like for like. I'll look forward to someone probably telling me why that was. But I'm glad you've been there, and hopefully tonight a few of you will have been enlivened to the fact that it's a good battlefield to visit. There's lots to see, and you can still see a lot of it. Peronne is much bigger than it was, but you can still get around Mont St Quentin. There's a great little walk that you can do that takes you around. I don't know if you saw all that, James, now, but there's a little trail that you can do. And
yeah, we went right through the wood and round the back. And what amazed me, because I don't normally look for souvenirs, but you couldn't help but trip over the debris.
Yeah,
there was like 75 fuses lying around. There was bullets, and I've never seen anything quite like that. And I visited different battlefields, but that was quite unique. So there must have been an awful lot of firepower used in that area at that time.
Yeah, well, and a lot of what you found may have been from that battle, but don't forget it was fought over from 1968
That's right, yeah,
as well. You know,
yeah,
in push and return push. So probably French, German, and Australian, and all sorts there.
But yeah, it's quite. It was worth the visit. There's no doubt about it. I found it really fascinating.
I agree.
Area.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, many thanks for that. Excellent talk. Thank you.
All the best.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
James.
Bye.
Campbell, your turn. Last question.
Thanks for taking my question, David. Julian, great presentation as usual. I love how you use the maps. It really helps figure out where things are happening. I'm wondering, though, what happened to these battalions after the battle? It doesn't sound like there were a lot of them left over.
No, indeed. I'll have to read a little bit more to find out what does happen to them. I know that number 9 platoon was finished with only 6 men left. The Australians have their last action in October, I think it is, of 1918 on the whole front. They get used for a little bit more after this, and then they're withdrawn, so that they're not even in action in November, if I recall rightly. They're certainly not. They're taken out of the line as a whole. Canadians and Brits are still fighting, but the Aussies haven't got long to go.
We lost him.
We've lost Julian.
Okay, we got the question answered. Great.
We got the question answered.
Yeah, I think so. Super.
I wonder if Julian's going to get back to us.
Oh,
there you're back. Back again, Julian. You froze up. Julian, you answered the question there. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for your question there, Campbell. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. So if I can just ask for everybody just to finally raise their hands once again as a sign of everybody's gratitude to Julian for his super presentation. I can confirm that there's hundreds of hands going up again, Julian, as a silent round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. Got a couple of things for you. Coming up on the 14th of August, which is a week on Saturday, we're going to experiment. We're going to experiment with a live hybrid meeting. So we're going to be live in a WFA room, if you like, for a Yorkshire branch meeting where we're going to have Graham Kemp talking about the U-boat campaign. So that's Saturday the 14th at 2:30 p.m. So if you fancy watching that, it may not work because of the technology, but we'll give it a whirl and see how hybrid meetings work. And then a fortnight today, on the 16th of August, we've got Dr. Spencer Jones coming back to us to talk about the battle that saved the BEF, Lecato in 1914. So we've gone from 1918 this week with Julian, back all the way to 1914 with Spencer Jones. So if you're not registered already, please do so. There are other webinars also, which I invite everybody to register for on the WFA website. Just click through and click on the registration button. That's me done for tonight. That's Julian done for tonight as well. So thanks, Jules. And I hope to see everybody again in future webinars. Thanks very much for watching. Good night. Mademoiselle from Armentières.